The first sensation was an empty stomach, but not the usual kind of emptiness you feel when you skip a meal. It was the kind of hunger that burned, that made your whole body ache from within, as if every cell was screaming for help. Bianca had grown used to the pain, to the dry mouth, to the sore throat, to the nausea of someone surviving only on flour and salt broth. At 24, there was no youth left in her eyes, only resilience. She was far too thin, not out of vanity, but necessity. The fogged-up mirror in the room showed the same image every morning, a woman who shouldn't be standing, yet kept moving, out of obligation, because if she stopped, she'd die, and no one would have the time or desire to notice. She shared a damp room with her younger sister Brenda, who was born with a rare and painful condition, progressive muscle necrosis. At just 10 years old, Brenda could barely hold a cup in her hands. Bianca was the one who fed her, changed her adult diapers, picked up her meds when any were left over at the health center, and made up stories about sick princesses who turned into queens when they closed their eyes at night. And even through all the pain, Brenda smiled. The kind of smile that shatters an already broken heart. The rent was overdue, the electricity had been cut, and the water was drawn with a borrowed bucket from the neighbor. In the neighborhood where they lived, no one was shocked by such things. But Bianca refused to accept the fate she'd been handed. She wanted something better for Brenda. She dreamed of a real mattress, a motorized wheelchair, fresh fruit, and maybe, just maybe, an experimental surgery that could stop the progression of the disease. But dreams are expensive, and Bianca had nothing left to sell. She tried every decent path. She cleaned motel bathrooms, sold cheese bread at the station, took cleaning jobs where no one wanted to pay, tried to ask the city for help, but was ignored. And then, in a feverish and desperate night, she typed into the borrowed neighbor's phone, how to legally sell a kidney. But the words kidney and legally rarely appear in the same sentence. What she found instead was a cryptic, almost coded ad. Need quick cash? Are you healthy? Guaranteed anonymity? Discreet clinic? Cash payment? Only blood type O or AB. At first, she laughed. Then she cried. Then she called. The voice on the other end was male, precise, clean, far too polite to be a common criminal, but cold, like a scalpel. He asked her weight, height, habits, blood type, if she'd ever had surgery, if she had children, and at the end, he simply said, "You're eligible. Bring a fake ID. The price is $40,000. Sign, operate, disappear. No questions, no returns. If you have doubts, don't come. We don't want trouble either." Bianca hung up, sat on the floor, and stayed there in silence, listening to her sister's snores and moans through the night. She thought about everything, about God, her absent father, her mother buried in a mass grave, the day she had nothing to eat and chewed a candle. She thought maybe this was wrong, but then remembered the phrase, experimental surgery, and the decision made itself, as if her love for Brenda weighed more than her kidneys. Because maybe, in the end, that's what love was, choosing to suffer so the other wouldn't. She booked the trip, took an interstate bus, brought only a backpack and a handwritten letter explaining what she had done, in case she didn't come back. At the bus station, she wore her best outfit, a blouse borrowed from the neighbor and a patched-up pair of jeans. She arrived at the clinic on a deserted street where there were no signs or doorbells, just a grey, armored door with a camera overhead and a discreet phrase painted in black, "Entry for scheduled patients." She was greeted by a security guard in a suit, entered a clean, cold hallway, lit by steady fluorescent lights that didn't flicker. The silence was dense, as if even thoughts were anesthetized. And then she saw him, a tall man, wearing a white coat, dark hair, neatly trimmed beard, with clinical and distant eyes. He didn't smile, didn't offer a handshake. He simply said, "Are you Bianca?" She nodded. "Good, follow me. We need to start the tests. Time here is surgical." She followed him, not knowing that this man was more than a doctor, more than a clinic director. He was fate, and the pain she was about to give was only the beginning of a story the world would call madness. But that one day, they would call love. Everything was white, too white, white like absence, like emptiness, like a place where no one had ever truly lived, only passed through, suffered, and been erased. The clinic's hallway seemed overly sterile, as if it hadn't been cleaned with products, but with fear. There were no posters, no fake smiles, no chatting people, like in regular hospitals. There was only Bianca, the rhythmic sound of the doctor's shoes tapping against the polished floor, and that cold. A cold that didn't come from the air conditioning, but from the lack of any humanity in the place. The room she was left in had nothing but a stretcher, a scale, a powered-off monitor, and a ceiling camera. Bianca didn't know if it was a consulting room, a pre-op station, or a silent warning that from that moment on, her body was no longer hers. When the man returned, he carried a clipboard in one hand, rubber gloves in the other, and an expression she couldn't decipher. He didn't seem cruel, but he didn't seem like a doctor either. It was as if he wore that lab coat the same way someone wears a disguise, and that frightened her even more. "Let's be direct," he said, without lifting his eyes from the clipboard. "Payment will be made in cash after the operation. You'll receive general anesthesia. The procedure will last a maximum of 4 hours. No health insurance is involved. You signed the document waiving us of any liability. Is that clear?" Bianca nodded, pale, sweating cold, but keeping her chin up, because she was there for Brenda, for a chance, for a remote possibility of rewriting her own tragedy. "Your real name will not appear on any record. Here, you're just patient B13. A nurse will administer a mild sedative. Then we'll do the final exams. If something goes wrong, you'll be discarded. But if all goes as expected, you'll leave here with 40,000 Rs and a discreet scar on the left side of your abdomen. What do you think?" "Sounds like a good price to not starve to death," she replied, with a courage that surprised even herself. The man looked at her for a second longer than necessary, and in that second, something happened. His gaze flickered, as if an invisible crack had opened in that marble-like face. He said nothing, just turned away, opened the door, and murmured, "The anesthesiologist will take care of the rest," and disappeared. But that look remained. The next hours were a blur of echoes. Bianca put on a disposable gown, signed papers she didn't read, felt a sting. The world spun. The stretcher was pushed. The ceiling lights moved in circles, like a rewinding tape. And just before sleep took her, she imagined Brenda smiling, holding a red apple in both hands, even if only in her mind. When she woke up, everything hurt. Her head, her eyes, her soul. Her body felt empty, as if they hadn't just taken a kidney, but also part of her dignity. She was in a clean room, but without windows. A tray of cold soup sat beside her, a glass of water. No sign of anyone. Days passed, maybe 3, maybe 5. Time blurred in that place. She woke up, ate, slept, until a masked woman entered and announced, "Discharge, your payment is ready. Get dressed." Bianca obeyed. When she stepped out of the room, she was led back into the white hallway. And there he was, the man from before, no longer in a lab coat, now in a suit, holding a leather briefcase. He handed her the money, counted, in clean bills. No words, no questions. But when he touched her fingers to pass the envelope, a shiver, a trace of something that should not exist between two strangers in a place like that. "Do you think this will be enough to save your sister?" he asked at last. She froze. Her heart nearly forgot to beat. "How do you know about my sister?" The man hesitated, as if he'd said more than he should. And then he replied, with the same calm voice, but now with an almost imperceptible crack. "I always know. Good luck, Bianca." She left the clinic with the wound still aching, the money in her bag, and a burning question in her chest. Who was that man? What she didn't know was that fate already had plans to bring them back together. And next time, it wouldn't be with scalpels and contracts. It would be eye to eye, with broken hearts trying to find in each other what the world had never given them. Days after the surgery, Bianca still couldn't sleep properly. The scar burned in silence, but it wasn't the incision that hurt the most. It was the absence of meaning. The room where Brenda slept was still dark, stuffy, damp. But now, there were stacks of medicine in the corner, fresh food on the table, and a fan humming in the outlet. Bianca bought everything her sister needed, paid 3 months' rent in advance, and still had money left over. But even so, there was a hole, a guilt that wouldn't close, a feeling that part of her had been left behind in that clinic. Something more than a kidney, something she couldn't name. She started having nightmares. She dreamed of a dark surgical room where the walls wept blood, and the man with dark eyes watched her in silence, holding her heart in his hands. She woke up drenched in sweat, her face wet, her chest heaving, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw that look again, cold, almost cruel, but cracked, as if he was trying to protect himself from himself. The money started running out because caring for someone ill is a daily investment, and she knew she would have to work again soon. She looked for simple jobs, but most required a high school diploma or some referral. And Bianca had only courage and the desperate need to save her sister as her resume. That's when she saw a flyer posted at a local bakery, looking for assistant for light duties in private office. Good appearance, absolute discretion, weekly payment, a phone number, no address, no business name. She called. The voice on the other end was the same. Bianca. The world stopped. Her heart missed a beat. How did you know it was me? I recognized your breathing, he replied. And the sentence wasn't a flirt. It was a confession. He gave her the address, a wealthy neighborhood, a glass townhouse with a suspended garden and white curtains in the windows. When she arrived, she hesitated to press the doorbell, but the gate opened by itself. The camera had identified her, and there he was. No lab coat, no badge, no mask, just him. The same man from the clinic, the same unreadable eyes, but this time his tie was loosened, as if he no longer cared to look so impenetrable. You said you were a doctor, she stated, firm. I never said anything, he replied. You just assumed, and now you're hiring me. Why? He looked down for a moment, took a deep breath, then looked at her with something close to sincerity, or something she desperately wanted to believe was sincerity. Because you need it, and because I owe you this. Bianca should have walked away. He owed her nothing. In truth, everything about it smelled like a trap. But what kept her feet grounded wasn't the money. It was the voice. It was the sense that something inside him was broken, something that felt familiar. The job is simple, he said. Reading reports, organizing files, helping with schedules. Nothing invasive. You won't go into surgical rooms. You don't ask questions. And you get paid every Friday. What's your name? He hesitated. Around here, they call me Marco. Bianca knew in that instant that wasn't his real name. But she also knew that every truth has its own timing. And maybe, no matter how absurd it sounded, she wanted to discover who that man really was, in the most dangerous way possible, by staying close. She accepted the job. The following days were strangely calm. Bianca read reports without names, files with codes, folders with dates. Nothing made sense. Everything was neutral. But between one coffee and another, between one silence and the next, she and Marco began to build something. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't passion. It was a pact of presence. Two strangers pretending not to notice each other, yet watching every breath the other took. She saw him angry on the phone, crying alone on the terrace, caring for an orchid with such delicacy it seemed absurd coming from him. And one night, while handing him a spreadsheet, she noticed something that made her shiver. In the corner of the file, there was a blurred scan image, and the name, M. Vasquez, a kidney, a date, a code, B13. Bianca froze. She was B13. Marco noticed her stare, took the paper from her hands, but it was too late. She understood. He wasn't just the one who hired her. It wasn't a coincidence. He knew. He had always known. And more than that, he was hiding something that could change everything. But instead of running away, Bianca stayed, because deep down, she wanted to find out if that man was just a buyer of organs, or someone desperately trying to save his own soul. Bianca's body was healing fast, but the wound inside her would not close. Even as the physical incision gradually faded, a discreet line that curved along the left side of her abdomen like a silent reminder. Something hurt far more, the feeling of being watched, not by cameras, not by others, but by him, Marco, the man who had hired her after taking something he never should have had. The routine at the private clinic was like a silent dance. Bianca arrived early, organized documents, avoided asking questions, and pretended not to notice that the files were always incomplete, with missing names, strange gaps. Sometimes a record vanished from the system after she opened it. Other times, Marco called her into his office and said softly, "Some things here aren't meant to be seen twice, Bianca." But it wasn't just his voice that disturbed her. It was the way he looked at her when he thought no one saw. A silent gaze, almost wounded. As if every move she made, every word, every hesitation, prodded a memory he was fighting to forget. She started noticing patterns. Marco would disappear for hours, took calls in another language. Sometimes he came back with red eyes. Other times, he smelled like bleach, as if he'd spent the night scrubbing away ghosts. One day, Bianca found a towel with fresh blood in his office bathroom, and next to it, a vial of anesthetic. She didn't ask, he didn't explain, but that night, she didn't sleep. The tension between them began to shift. It was no longer just about secrets. It was desire, contained, heavy, poisoned by what they knew about each other. Marco began to get closer, brought her coffee, commented on the weather. One day, he forgot to lock the room where the medical files were kept. She entered, saw images, saw names, saw her own medical chart, scanned with date and time, and beside it, a handwritten note with one sentence. She deserved more than this. It was his. The handwriting was his. And Bianca understood. He wasn't just part of the clinic. He was the one in charge, the boss, the owner, the man who created that place, and who, for some reason she still couldn't grasp, had chosen her for something more. The next afternoon, Marco was waiting outside, in a car, tinted windows, a coat far too expensive for the season. He said he needed to talk, that he didn't want her working at the clinic anymore, that he had another offer. Bianca refused immediately. He insisted, "You can work with me, just me, from home, as my personal assistant. Forget the clinic, forget the files, forget everything." "And why?" she asked, facing him without fear. "Because you feel guilty." Marco fell silent, the kind of silence that bleeds. Then he looked at her like he was seeing something no one else could. "Because you gave me the only part of my body that still works right." The words hung between them. A confession, an apology, a surrender, and at the same time, a curse. Bianca should have stepped out of the car, but she couldn't. They stayed there, trapped in a time that wasn't chronological anymore. It was emotional. A time where love and guilt touched like two sharp needles trying to stitch a past that still bled. In the following weeks, Bianca began working from Marco's penthouse, a quiet place with panoramic windows and sparse furniture. Almost everything was white, except for the dark wooden piano in the corner. She discovered he played, discovered he read Russian poetry, that he ate little, slept even less, and that at night he'd lie staring at the ceiling as if waiting for something or someone to forgive him. She started cooking for him, without asking. He began leaving her notes, without signing them, and little by little, what was once a debt became companionship. What was mistrust became attentiveness, and what had been mere survival turned into something she didn't yet know how to name. But that moved inside her with fury, until one night, he walked into the kitchen with a glass of wine in hand. Bianca was doing the dishes, and without looking at her, he said, "Do you regret giving me your kidney?" She froze. "I didn't give it to you. I sold it." He took a deep breath. "I didn't want it to be you, but it was. And now, I don't know what to do anymore." She turned to face him, for the first time, without fear, only pain. "Then don't do anything. Let me leave." He grabbed her arm, gently, firmly, but with a plea in the touch. "If you leave, I go back to dying." And in that instant, her scar burned. The incision trembled, but what truly hurt was what had yet to be born. Love. A love that bled from within, that begged forgiveness for being born where it never should have existed. The apartment where Bianca now lived, even though she had never been formally invited, was a place where the days passed without announcing their arrival. Time moved differently there. There were massive windows, but the sun rarely entered. The curtains were always half drawn. as if Marco only allowed a little life in at a time. And Bianca, though sleeping in a guest room furnished like a luxury hotel, didn't feel like she owned anything, not even her own body, not even her own silence. But something between them changed with every morning. He began listening to her voice more carefully, asking simple questions like, "What do you dream about?" Or, "When did you start wearing your hair like that?" And Bianca, initially closed off, started sharing things she told no one else. How her mother died of infection in a public hospital due to neglect. How her father abandoned her over debts with drug dealers. How she learned to tell stories to Brenda using kitchen objects. How she cried only in secret, because she believed crying in front of others gave them a power she never wanted them to have. Marco listened to everything, quietly, sometimes with watery eyes, but never letting the tears fall. The kind of man who carried guilt and hope in equal measure. And it was on one of those nights, unmarked by time, without warning, that the unthinkable happened. Bianca was in the living room, reading some random book, trying to ignore the itch of the scar that still stung from within. Marco appeared with a blanket over his shoulders, holding a glass of wine. He sat beside her on the couch, closer than ever before. "I need to tell you something," he said. "If it's about the clinic," she began. "It's not about the clinic. It's about me." She closed the book. The air between them grew heavy. He took a deep breath, lowered his eyes. "I didn't buy your kidney. I received it. You saved me. I'm the recipient." Bianca didn't answer. The world stopped spinning for a moment. "Why?" she whispered. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I wanted you to like me without knowing. I wanted to feel just once that someone could love me, without being in debt to me. And because I'm a coward, the silence that followed was the most painful of all." She stood up, walked to the window. The city outside seemed smaller, as if everything had shrunk in the face of that revelation. The man she had started to love was, in truth, the reason for her scar, the reason for her pain, but also the reason she was still there. "And now?" she asked. "What am I to you? An employee? A paid debt?" Marco rose slowly, walked to her, touched her arm with care. "You're the part of me that started living after the surgery. The only part that still feels." She looked him in the eyes, searching for lies, for shame, for any sign that would justify the fear she felt, but found only truth, a twisted truth, painful, imperfect, but real. And in that moment, they kissed. It wasn't a beautiful kiss. It wasn't clean. It was a kiss full of tears, of anger, of desire and surrender. A kiss that said, "I hate you for doing this to me, and also, I love you for staying." After that kiss, they made love like two broken bodies trying to sew each other back together. Every touch was an apology. Every moan was a muffled scream of everything that couldn't be said. And when they woke up, lying side by side under linen sheets that belonged to neither of them, they knew something had changed forever. But the shadow of the past never sleeps. The next morning, while Bianca made coffee, Marco received a call. He answered in silence. His expression changed, turned pale, tight. He didn't say a word, just hung up and sat at the table. "What was it?" she asked. He took a long time to respond. "Do you remember the day you asked if I felt guilty?" "I remember." "Now, you're going to find out why." She didn't understand, but he didn't explain. Instead, he placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a dossier with a name, Brenda Alves, her sister's name. Bianca's heart froze. "Why do you have my sister's medical records?" Marco stood. "Because I had her investigated, because I tried to find a solution, because maybe I'm more involved in this than I ever imagined." She trembled. "What did you do, Marco?" And then he said the sentence that would change everything. "The man who wanted to buy your kidney wasn't me. It was someone worse, someone who's still buying. And now, he's coming for you." In that apartment, surrounded by glass, where silence used to feel tender, the air now felt like razor blades. Everything seemed made of crystal, fragile, transparent, ready to shatter with the slightest touch. And between Bianca and Marco, there was nothing left separating them, except the truth. And the truth, no matter how clear, burned like a brand. Bianca couldn't stop staring at the envelope with her sister's name. The paper shook in her hands. Her head spun as if the floor had been ripped from beneath her. Marco stood there, across the kitchen, frozen. He looked petrified by his own mistake. But what Bianca saw now wasn't the man who had helped her. It was the man who had known and said nothing, who had access to her pain and used it as a key to open doors that should have stayed closed. "You investigated my sister?" she repeated, her voice cut, rasped, nearly breathless. Marco tried to move closer. She stepped back, instinctively. "I needed to know who you were, to know if it was safe. If someone was using you, using me, I sold part of my body, for her, out of love. And you were using me?" "No, Bianca, I was trying to protect you." She laughed, a dry, disbelieving laugh, from someone who expected the worst and was still surprised. "This," she gestured between them, "was never real, was it? It was just guilt, just badly disguised gratitude." He stepped closer. She didn't step back this time. "Bianca, I fell in love with you. You fell in love with the organ you received. The rest was just a bonus." He closed his eyes. The pain was visible. The wound was mutual. Bianca walked out, wandered the streets like someone fleeing an explosion. The world felt bigger than it should. People rushed faster. Cars sounded louder. Her love had been born from a transplant and died from a lie. Going back home was her only choice. Brenda needed her. Real life was waiting. And maybe, among diapers and medication, she'd forget the man who carried a part of her inside his own body. But forgetting Marco was like trying to tear out a piece of herself. Literally. Days passed. Marco didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up, and that hurt more than any confrontation. Bianca tried to move on, started selling sweets again, this time in front of a hospital, with fear, with shame, with longing, until one night, a black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down. A man she'd never seen, elegant, grey-haired, tailored suit, handed her a card. "I know who you are, Bianca. And I know what you did for him, but I want you to stay away. He has things to lose, and you're not part of that." Bianca stared at him. The name on the card shimmered in gold. Vinicius Vasquez, Executive Board, Clinivida Holdings. "Are you his father?" "Not biologically, but what does that matter these days?" He smiled, but it wasn't a smile. It was a polite threat. "I came to pay you to disappear. For good." Bianca refused, tore the card in front of him. But the warning had been delivered, and in that moment, she understood. Marco was surrounded by monsters, and maybe he was one of them too, just a monster who bled in silence. Days later, Brenda had a crisis. The disease was progressing. Generic meds were no longer enough, and the name of a clinic appeared among the options for experimental treatment. A clinic promising muscular stabilization via neurostimulator implants. The cost? Unpayable. But the name at the bottom of the brochure stopped her cold. Clinivida. She called, registered under a false name, scheduled a consultation, and went to the sleek building reserved for special patients. But when she arrived, it wasn't a secretary who greeted her, nor a receptionist. It was Marco, with tired eyes, unshaven, bare-chested under his coat, as if he hadn't slept since the day she left. "Why are you here?" "Because only you can save my sister now." He looked down and murmured, "I thought you hated me." "So did I. But love sometimes disguises itself as hate just to keep from dying of shame." They looked at each other. The glass between them was no longer the windows. It was their souls, and both knew that from that moment on, pretending was no longer possible. What they had wasn't a debt, wasn't guilt. It was love, a love full of scars, but still alive. But outside, someone was watching, someone who wouldn't accept losing control. And what began as a kidney sale was about to become a war. The morning after Bianca and Marco's silent reconciliation, time felt suspended. The sky was grey, but there was no rain. The air was heavy, as if something was about to collapse. And in truth, it was. Bianca could feel it, in her chest, in her stomach, in the scar that had long since healed over, that whatever happened that day would change everything. She didn't yet know what, or how. She only knew one thing. There was no going back. She needed Marco's help to save Brenda, and more than that, She needed the truth, all of it. Raw, ugly, irreversible. Marco led her to an isolated wing of Clinavida. No signs, no nurses, no machines running. Just a room, closed, with frosted glass. Inside there was a different kind of silence, a silence dense like a tomb. When he opened the door, Bianca held her breath. On the bed, there was a boy, small, too thin for his age, pale, sleeping like someone who had already forgotten what it meant to be awake. A heart monitor blinked slowly, its rhythm steady, but fragile. Beside the bed, a photograph, the boy smiling at what seemed to be a birthday party, and behind him, Marco. Bianca stared at the picture for several seconds before she asked, "Who is he?" Marco didn't answer right away. He walked up to the bed, touched the boy's hand with a tenderness Bianca had never seen before, not even when he touched her. "This is Miguel," he said finally. "My son." The world stopped. Again, Bianca felt her knees weaken, her chin trembled, her throat dried out. "Your son?" "Yes." Marco now seemed like another man, broken, vulnerable. "I had him with a woman named Renata. She was my patient, terminal cancer. She knew she wouldn't live, but she wanted a child. She asked for my help. I agreed, not because of love for her, but for a love I didn't yet know I'd feel for him." Bianca stepped slowly toward the bed. The boy looked like a sleeping angel, but something was off, something in his face, a resemblance. He received the kidney." Marco nodded, his eyes wet. "He was born with bilateral kidney failure. He's been on dialysis since his second month. The doctors said he wouldn't live past 5. But then, I met you." Bianca stepped back. No. You said you were the recipient. I was the closest match. But at the time, I had liver damage. I wasn't eligible. And the only way was to find someone with the right blood type, healthy and desperate enough." Bianca trembled. "You used me. I saw you. I saw your application, your photo, and something in me screamed. I couldn't let them hand you over to the others. So I altered the records, paid out of pocket, and went there, not as a doctor, but as someone who needed your pain to stop another." She was crying now, but not out of sadness, out of rage, out of confusion, out of a love that was starting to die in slow motion. "You lied to me from the start. Every gesture, every kiss, every word. It was all guilt. At first, yes. But then, Bianca, then it was love. A love I didn't know could exist. A love born out of a mistake, but a love that still lived." She looked at the boy. "And now? Now he needs another transplant." Bianca's eyes widened. "But he already got the kidney, and his body is rejecting it." Bianca closed her eyes, and everything made sense. The reconciliation, the job offer, the sudden tenderness. Marco wasn't just in love, he was desperate, and now, she knew, he would do anything, even if it meant losing her again. "Don't ask me that," she whispered, eyes still closed. "Don't ask me again. I won't. I never will. But if you could see him smile, just once, you'd understand why I lost myself in you." She staggered out of the room, not looking back, but his words stayed, like needles, like poison, like truth. Miguel was just a child, innocent, sick, caught between life and death, and part of her already lived inside him. Now, Bianca had to choose, to keep hating the man who lied to save him, or love the boy, who might die with part of her still alive. In the days that followed, Bianca lived in a state of suspension. It was as if reality had turned gelatinous, as if nothing was solid enough to support her steps anymore. Everything felt unstable, the air, the ground, her thoughts. She came home and sat in the same corner of the couch for hours, staring at the wall, while Brenda asked if she was sick. Bianca smiled, said she was just tired. But inside, she was at war. Miguel was dying. Marco had lied, but he had also loved. The equation was impossible. The rage she felt was laced with compassion. Her disgust toward the deception battled with memories of his touch. The image of the child in the hospital bed merged with the memory of their kiss in the kitchen, under soft light, hearts open, eyes teary. She no longer knew what was right, or if it even mattered anymore. Then, a letter arrived. No sender. but the handwriting was his. If you're reading this, it means you've decided not to come back, and I respect that. But before you erase me from your memory, let me tell you the last lie I haven't confessed. Because, Bianca, this lie has your name. She stopped breathing. I lied when I said I wasn't a match. The truth is, I was. Perfectly. I was examined in secret, found out I could donate a kidney to Miguel, and for a moment, I thought about it. But the doctors said I had a chronic liver condition, that it was risky, that I could die. I hesitated, and in that hesitation, you appeared, with your hungry eyes, your quiet courage, your story of pain. And I hid behind it. I used your need to save my cowardice. I let you sacrifice yourself in my place. And ever since that day, I've lived with the weight of having chosen to survive, while you bled for me. The letter trembled in her hands, but she kept reading, tears streaming without permission. Months later, my liver got worse. I was hospitalized. And this time, without thinking, I decided to donate my kidney. Yes, even knowing you had already given yours, even knowing it wasn't necessary anymore, I did it. Because I needed to. Because I wanted to know what it felt like to endure the pain you bore for someone you love. Miguel got yours. I carried your pain. And now, you and I are linked from the inside, by an organ, by a story, by a mistake, and by a love that never should have existed, but did anyway. She didn't realize she was sobbing. Brenda ran in from the kitchen, frightened. Bianca just hugged her, tight, like someone embracing life, like someone who had just understood, all at once, what love truly is in its rawest form, the ability to suffer for another, to give, even when there's nothing left to give. At the end of the letter, a final line. If one day you want to know where I am, I'm at the place where it all began, waiting for you. One last time, no lies. Bianca knew exactly what he meant. The ghost clinic. That night, she put on her best clothes, still modest, and left. The rain was falling lightly, like in a film scene that aches. When she arrived at the address, the door was open. No guards, no lights, just him, Marco, sitting in the same room where she once signed the papers, wearing his lab coat, but with his eyes bare. I thought you wouldn't come. I thought I wouldn't either, she said, stepping closer. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't expect you to love me. Silence. But I love you, he said at last. Not because of guilt, not for what you did, but for who you are, for how you talk about your sister, for how you cry in silence, for how you saved me, even when I didn't deserve it. She took a deep breath. Her heart pounded too loud. You really donated. He lifted his shirt. The scar was there, identical to hers, only on the other side. Now we're symmetrical. He smiled. Two mistakes that complete each other. She cried, and then she hugged him. It was a different kind of embrace, not one of goodbye, not of guilt, but of meeting, of release, of two bodies that had bled, lied, broken, but survived. That night, they made love again, not as escape, but as forgiveness. And there, in the place where everything began, they finally understood. True love isn't born from perfection, but from shared imperfection. They weren't whole, but they were complete. What should have been the restart of a love story, healed, scarred, confessed, quickly turned into a new nightmare. In the days that followed their reunion, Marco tried to rebuild the lost time. He rescheduled appointments, cancelled surgeries, called off trips. He spent mornings with Bianca and nights reading to Miguel. The two had finally created a small refuge, a bubble in which love, pain, and forgiveness coexisted. But bubbles always burst. On a stifling afternoon, while Bianca tended to the flowers on the balcony, flowers she had chosen with Marco at a street fair, an envelope was slid under the door of the penthouse. No return address. Inside, only 3 printed photos on thick paper. In one, she was leaving the hospital beside Marco. In another, Brenda was walking up the street in the slums. And in the third, Miguel's adoptive mother, with a red circle drawn around her head. No words, just a number scribbled on the back. 72 hours. Marco arrived minutes later. When he saw the images, all the color drained from his face. as if the time they had rebuilt was crumbling before his eyes. "I knew it," he murmured. "I knew this would happen." "What is this?" Bianca asked, her voice cracked. He closed his eyes, rubbed his face, then looked at her with a pain that screamed. "It's the council, the people behind Clinivida, the ones who control the names, the documents, the disappearances. They think I've weakened you, that protecting you is betrayal. And now, they're sending a warning." She looked again at the photos. Her hands trembled. "They're threatening my sister. Not just her. You, Miguel, me." The world spun. Bianca tried to breathe, but the air was too heavy, too dirty. She could taste the fear in her mouth. "We need to run." "It's not that simple," Marco said. "They know where I am, where you live, where Brenda is. And if you disappear, they'll come after her." That was when Bianca made the cruelest decision of her life. "I'm going to leave." "What?" "I'll vanish. I'll give them what they want. I'll walk out of your life, disappear completely, and you'll say you left me, that you handed me over, that you erased me." "No," Marco shook his head. "That's not happening. It has to. This isn't about you or me. It's about Brenda, about Miguel, about two lives that can still be saved. I've already given a part of myself. Now I'll give the rest." He collapsed to his knees, literally, crying like a child, and she, silently, knelt with him, held him, kissed his eyes, his lips, his chest, like someone imprinting on memory a body she knows she'll never touch again. He whispered, desperate. "Forgive me for everything. I love you even more, and that's why I'm leaving." She left that same day, took no clothes, no keepsakes, not even a phone, just a small backpack with the fake documents Marco prepared and the address of a coastal town where she could start from zero. No name, no past, no Marco. She got out of the taxi at dusk. The sky was lilac, the sea calm. It was a beautiful place, but it hurt to look at it. She rented a simple room, got a job washing sheets at a small inn, spent her days cleaning what others dirtied, and her nights staring at the ceiling, silently repeating his name, like a mantra, like a promise. Marco, in turn, returned to the clinic, picked up his schedule, signed documents, received fake smiles, but he was never the same again. He secretly donated part of his salary to Brenda's clinic, disguised as an anonymous investor. He read every letter sent by the inn to the fake name Bianca now used, never replied, but read and cried. The love didn't die, but it was buried, alive, and the scar was still there, in both of them. Her left side, his right, like two open parentheses carved into flesh, like a story interrupted, like a suspended, not yet, but fate doesn't leave loose ends. And soon, something would happen that would force them to look at each other again, not by choice, but by life or death. Time passed without making a sound. No alarm rang, no calendar flipped dramatically. One day simply woke up inside another, as if mornings had forgotten to announce they were new. And Bianca was still alive, but living wasn't the same as existing. The city she had fled to, a nameless beachside village tucked between cliffs and salty winds, was a place where no one asked questions. Maybe that's why she survived. No one there cared where she came from. No one asked why she cried in the guest house bathroom after every shift. No one questioned why she slept hugging a man's shirt against her chest. She was just another woman among many, washing sheets, chopping vegetables, pretending that life begins anew when the sea knocks on your door. But the body, it doesn't forget. The scar ached on rainy days. It throbbed like a silent reminder of what had been taken, and of what she had chosen to leave behind. Sometimes she sat alone on the sand, running her fingers across the marked skin. The left side, Marco bore the other half on his right, two bodies connected by an invisible thread, by a piece of the same pain, by a love forcibly interrupted. She wrote letters, never sent them, just wrote, every day. Some were angry, others tender. Some contained only a single line. "Today I missed you more than yesterday." A silent ritual, like praying to someone you love but aren't sure is still alive. Brenda was doing well, better than ever. The anonymous help, which she pretended not to know the source of, granted access to expensive medications, regular tests, physiotherapy. The girl smiled more. She could already walk with assistance. Bianca invented stories about guardian angels who helped people in secret. But she knew that Angel had a name and a scar. Marco, on the other hand, lived in a world of steel, clinics, meetings, reports. But everything was grey. The days passed without flavour. Miguel was stable but silent. Doctors said it was common behaviour. Marco knew it wasn't. The boy no longer talked about stars, nor the future, nor asked for bedtime stories. What he said from time to time was only one question. Is she coming back? Marco didn't answer, because answering hurt more than the question. He tried to move on, tried to love again, tried to trust, but no one fit in the space Bianca had left. No woman, no song, no touch. It was as if love had learned to have only one name. One night, Marco entered the clinic's director office, unlocked the drawer, and pulled out Bianca's medical file. Still kept, still intact. He read it line by line, as if reading the certificate of a love. And then, for the first time in months, he cried, alone, in silence, just like she used to. The next morning, the unexpected happened. The guest house phone rang. Bianca was in the dining hall serving coffee. The manager picked up, gestured for her to come over. "It's for you," she said, surprised. "They used your real name." Bianca froze. "Who is it?" "They said it's from the hospital in São Paulo, that the case is urgent." She grabbed the phone. The world stopped spinning. "Hello?" On the other end, the voice was deep, formal, but urgent. "Miss Bianca Alves?" "Yes. This is Santa Aurora Hospital. We have a patient under intensive care. Name, Marco Vasquez. He was admitted with multiple organ failure. His record lists you as the emergency contact. We need your immediate authorization to begin an experimental transplant protocol." He refused all other contacts, only left your name. She was silent. The phone weighed like lead. "Miss, I'm on my way." She hung up, without thinking, without breathing, without packing. She took the money she had left. One bus, then another. Her whole body trembled. The scar felt like it was on fire. Hours later, she arrived at the hospital. The walls were too white. The smell, metallic. The hallways, slow. She walked like in a dream, or a nightmare, until a nurse led her to the ICU. And there he was, Marco, intubated, thin, grey, tubes everywhere, and still, him. The doctor explained that his body was rejecting the transplanted kidney, that they didn't know if it was physical or emotional, that they had tried everything, and that he refused all donors. He only wanted one thing, to see her. She entered the room, closed the door, and for the first time in a year, they looked at each other again, even with half-open, weak eyes. He smiled. She approached, touched her fingers to his. "I should hate you." He tried to laugh, but only tears came. "But all I can do is love you." And then she pressed her lips to his scar and whispered, "If it's to save you, cut me again." Marco was between life and death, and time, which once had seemed too slow, now flew like a blade. With each passing minute in the hospital, monitors beeped, nurses rushed in and out, the doctor's eyes filled with concern, and hope withered like flowers left under the sun. Multiple organ failure was advancing quickly. The organs were shutting down. First the kidney, then the liver, then the lungs, and soon, the heart. Bianca spent her days seated at his side, almost motionless, like a candle burning in a dark room. She held his hand and read aloud the letters she had written during the year they were apart. Letters he had never read, letters she never had the courage to send. Now, one by one, they were whispered into his ear, like a final attempt to pull Marco back before silence took him forever. But he didn't react, not even when the doctor explained there was a chance, minimal but real, of another transplant, an experimental protocol, high risk, but possible. The only condition, accepting a new donor. Marco shook his head, weak but resolute. "No," he said, voice cracking. "I already took what didn't belong to me once. I won't do it again." Bianca cried, begged, screamed, but he wouldn't budge. "I lived too long with a part of you inside me, Bianca. If I have to die now, I want to die whole." But she wouldn't accept it. She couldn't. So Bianca did the unthinkable. She went to the hospital board, demanded to be tested, said she wanted to donate, even after already having donated once, even after doctors explained it wasn't recommended, that her body might not endure it. She insisted, signed every document, said it didn't matter, that she hadn't really lived since the day he left. "If he dies," she said, looking the doctor straight in the eye, "the part of him still living in me dies too. So what's the difference?" The tests confirmed it. She was compatible, but the risk was immense. She could die on the operating table, and yet she didn't hesitate. Hours before the surgery, she entered Marco's room one last time. He was sedated, but awake, his gaze distant, but his soul still present. "You gave me a part of yourself before you even knew my name," she said, voice trembling. "Now it's my turn, but this time I know who you are, and I love you even more for it." She leaned down, kissed his forehead, and left without looking back. The hallway to the operating room felt longer than the first time. Every step echoed with the weight of her choice. Bianca wasn't sure if she would survive, but she was sure she wanted to die trying to save the man who had taught her how to love with an open wound. In the white room, the scalpel cut. Time froze. The monitor beeped, and for a moment, everything was silent. Bianca floated, felt light, distant, as if between worlds. But then, a voice echoed through the darkness. "She's stable." Heart rate increasing. "Let's close her up." Then another voice. Marco responded, kidney function returning. His body accepted it. And then, the world began to breathe again. Hours later, in separate rooms, two bodies rested. One in a light coma, the other with a high fever, but alive. Both alive. The doctors couldn't explain how, but what science can't explain, love bears witness to. Bianca had saved Marco twice, and Marco, even unconscious, smiled in a dream, because he knew. He knew she had come back. He knew that, against all rules, she had chosen to give him everything once more. But now, what came next wouldn't be hospitals, nor pain. What came next would be redemption. The sound of the monitors filled the room like a constant whisper. The mechanical breathing, the rhythmic beeps, the IV drip falling in a tempo that seemed to measure hope itself. Marco lay there, fragile, wires and tubes covering his body, pale skin, eyes closed, muscles in complete rest. But there was something different, a faint movement at the corner of his lips, almost a smile, a sign, small, but enough to alert the doctors. He was coming back. Bianca, meanwhile, was in the ICU next door, still unconscious. The abdominal incision was deeper than the first. Her fever rose and fell in dangerous cycles. Her already exhausted body fought as best it could, and even in sleep, she murmured, nonsense, names, sounds, sometimes just one, Marco. When he woke, it was gradual. Like climbing out of a deep well, clinging to memories. The first thing he saw was the ceiling lights. The second was the nurse holding his chart. "Mr. Vasquez, you gave us quite a scare." He blinked slowly. His voice came out hoarse. "Where is she?" The nurse hesitated but soon replied, "Next room, stable, but recovering slowly." Marco tried to get up, but his body wouldn't obey. He lay there, caught between the urgency of seeing her and the physical impossibility. The doctor entered, confirmed the progress, said he could have died, that the kidney had been accepted, that it was a very unusual donation. Marco simply nodded. He knew he was alive again, because Bianca had given of herself, once more. Not out of need, not for money, but for love. And that was both unbearable and divine. Hours later, she woke up. She was weak, sweating, but alive. The first thing she asked, The doctor smiled. "He's fine. He's awake. He's alive because of you." Again, Bianca cried, not from pain, but from relief. She wanted to see him, to hold his hand, to hear his voice, but was forbidden. Recovery still required strict rest. The medical team insisted she stay in bed, but her heart didn't know how to wait. In the middle of the night, while everyone slept, she got up slowly. Her body ached. The wound burned. But she walked, step by step, breaking into a cold sweat, until she reached his room. She paused, took a deep breath, and entered. Marco was asleep, but sensing her presence, he opened his eyes, slowly, as if dreaming of a miracle, and seeing it come true. Bianca, she walked over, sat on the edge of the bed, crying. "I thought I lost you." "You almost did because I'm an idiot." She laughed, weakly, but still laughed. "And I'm stubborn, and you are the love of my life." She rested her forehead against his, both bearing new scars, both with tears in their eyes. And that starless night, they made a silent promise that they would never again let the world tear them apart. But the world doesn't forget so easily. Outside the hospital, a dark car pulled up. The same man in a suit, Vinicius Vasquez, the clinic's advisor, stepped out, answered his phone. "Was the transplant successful?" asked the voice on the other end. "Yes, unfortunately, yes." "And her?" "Still alive, but we have a problem. They're back together." Silence on the line. "Pomson, you know what to do." Vinicius hung up, looked toward the hospital, and walked back to his car. Because to some, true love is a threat, and where there is surrender, power feels challenged. Bianca and Marco didn't know it yet, but their reunion, so fragile and freshly rebuilt, was about to be tested by the most destructive force of all, the fear of those who are losing control. But now, they were ready, because there were no more lies between them, only love and scars. The room was silent. The heart monitor blinked steadily. Bianca slept in the chair beside the bed, her body still exhausted from surgery, but her fingers were intertwined with Marco's, as if, even in sleep, she refused to let go of the only anchor still keeping her alive. Marco watched her. He had been awake for a few minutes. The physical pain was still there, but his heart beat with a new lightness. For the first time in years, he felt whole, healed, not just in body, but in soul. And it was all because of the woman lying there, her head tilted sideways, her face as pale as his had been days before. He tried to move, but his arm didn't respond, so he spoke, softly, hoarsely, but audible. "Bianca." She opened her eyes instantly, as if his name had been a password. She jumped up, nearly stumbling to the floor, touched his face, his hair, his shoulders, as if confirming this wasn't a dream. "You're awake." "I am." He smiled faintly. "Thanks to you." Again. But it was a different kind of cry. Not grief, not fear, relief. Gratitude for a gift the world tried to steal, but that came back, whole, hers. "I thought I'd lost you. I thought I'd never see you again." She leaned her face into his, kissed his scar. He kissed hers. And in that moment, with both of them marked by the same cut, the same risk, the same choice, something greater than love was born. A silent pact, a promise that didn't need words. The miracle had happened. Not the medical one, but the miracle of two people rebuilding themselves through each other. But fate wasn't done yet. Hours later, the hospital director entered the room. Her expression was stern. Her hands gripped an envelope. "Mr. Vasquez, we need to talk." Bianca sat up, startled. Marco nodded. "We've just received an official notice from Clinivida's board. A dossier. Inside are internal documents proving both of your involvement in unauthorized procedures, off-protocol transplants, falsified donation consent, hidden operational risks, and above all, an irreversible ethical breach." She placed the envelope on the table. "You're being suspended from all medical activity indefinitely. And Ms. Bianca, you are being summoned to testify within 72 hours. Bianca felt the ground vanish beneath her. Marco didn't blink. "Was it the board?" he asked, his voice cold. The doctor simply nodded. "They claim you violated confidentiality, that you exposed the system, that you had a personal relationship with a donor, and that puts them at risk." Bianca looked at him, panicked. "Marco, what can they do?" "Everything," he replied, eyes unflinching. "They can destroy my license, sue me, they can separate us." But as he said that, he squeezed her hand tighter, as if defying the impossible. "Or we do the opposite." "What?" "Expose them." Bianca's eyes widened. "That's suicide." Maybe. But it's the only way to make sure no one else has to sell their body to feed someone they love. She said nothing, but something in her shifted. That night, with their eyes fixed on the ceiling and hearts steadier than ever, Marco and Bianca made a new pact, not just of love, but of justice, because what bound them was more than romance. It was a scar carved from truth, and those who bleed together can face the world. The hospital still breathed with the same artificial calm, but something had changed. The hallways no longer felt neutral. The walls seemed to listen, and the fixed cameras seemed to watch. Bianca and Marco knew they were being observed, that every step, every word, every touch was now a threat to the silent empire Klinivida had built over decades. But they also knew something else. They had nothing left to lose. That morning, the two sat face to face, he still pale, she with her scar throbbing. In the middle of the table, a folder. Inside it, what Marco had collected over the years: altered contracts, falsified exams, manipulated medical records, audio recordings where board members approved illegal transactions in coded language. Nothing a layperson would understand, but enough to topple empires if it landed in the right hands. "Are you sure about this?" Bianca asked, her voice trembling. "No," he replied, "but it's the right thing. For the first time in my life, I want to love you without hiding anything. Not from myself, not from the world." She held his hand, eyes glistening. She knew that choice could cost everything: peace, health, freedom. But she also knew their love was never built on comfort. It was built on surrender, on pain, and on forgiveness. That afternoon, they walked into the public prosecutor's office together. They were met with suspicion, but when they opened the folder, the room fell into heavy silence. Prosecutors exchanged looks, called others, scheduled meetings. Bianca and Marco were placed under temporary protection. The contents were bigger than anyone expected, and more dangerous too. The next night, Marco's name appeared in the news, first as former clinic director under investigation, then as whistleblower in international organ trafficking ring disguised as a healthcare plan, and finally, as the man saved twice by the same woman, now ready to return the life he was given. The case exploded, and with it came retaliation. Anonymous messages, break-in attempts, veiled threats. But Bianca didn't back down, neither did Marco. They were together, sleeping on temporary mattresses in borrowed apartments, sharing the little they had, laughing when they could, loving each other with urgency, but with truth. And between subpoenas and hearings, between interviews and silence, they discovered their love was no longer just a story, it was a symbol. A reporter asked at a press conference, "Mr. Vasquez, why risk everything for a woman who accused you, left you, and nearly died because of you?" He smiled, a smile that silenced the room. "Because she was the only person who gave me something without ever asking for anything back. Not the kidney, not the love." Bianca, beside him, cried, but it was a sweet cry, of someone finally hearing the truth, not hidden, not softened, not manipulated, but spoken, raw, beautiful, real. Days later, the Klinivida board was dissolved. Lawsuits began. Arrests were made. Vinicius Vasquez, Marco's stepfather, was indicted, and in the end, everything returned to place, except for the two of them, because Bianca and Marco were no longer the same people. They weren't donor and recipient, nor patient and director. They were just survivors. Survivors of a system that tried to turn love into currency. But in this case, it failed, because their love had no price. 2 years had passed. The name Klinivida was now just a legal entry buried in criminal proceedings, old news reports, and academic articles. Those who profited from human suffering had been condemned. The system had collapsed. But Marco and Bianca knew what they had built wasn't born from the fall of the empire. It was born from what remained after it. They left São Paulo, moved to the countryside, far from the spotlights, far from the headlines, not to hide, but to live. They opened a small community clinic in Brenda's name, offering free care for people in vulnerable situations. They called for volunteer doctors, organized health drives, treated every patient as if they were the only one. because they knew what it was like to be on the other side. Marco went back to studying. Bianca, now graduated, trained as a caregiver. The two worked hand in hand, literally. Anyone who saw them thought they'd been married for decades, and maybe they had, in a way. Their wedding had no altar, no ring, but it had a shared scar, and love enough to cover every inch of their souls. Brenda got better each day. She now walked on her own. She wrote stories, and often said she wanted to be a doctor, like Marco and Bianca, but without cutting anyone, she joked, and they laughed, like people who had won the war. But the greatest miracle was still to come. On an amber afternoon, with the smell of fresh bread wafting from the neighbor's oven, Bianca called Marco from the backyard. "I need to show you something." He came in. She pulled an envelope from the drawer. A test. He read it, eyes wide, then smiled, then cried. "A baby? A baby." He knelt, kissed her belly, then her scar. "How is this possible? Maybe. It doesn't have to be." Time passed. Her belly grew. Marco built the crib. Brenda drew hearts on the nursery walls. And on a calm morning, no sirens, no blood, no rush, Bianca gave birth to a boy, healthy, strong, with a birthmark on the left side of his abdomen. They looked at each other, said nothing. They knew what it meant. Life had stitched, with care, what had once been torn. Now, there were two hearts. A father who carried love on the right side of his body, a mother who carried love on the left side of her soul, and a son, born with the trace of both, the sign that pain had passed. That love, when it survives, leaves a mark, but a beautiful one, a mark from those who bled and still bloomed.